All right. All right. Let's dive into our topics because it's very, very, very crucial what's going on. What's been taking place for the last 48 hours
Absolutely.
in Niger. Let me share a picture here with our viewers so they can see. I always like to show pictures because
I love it.
they can always. So here is a picture here. This is the Foreign Minister of France. Her name is Catherine Colonna. So basically what she's saying is now that France cannot, and this France cannot no longer carry out its mission.
Yep.
That's usually a subtle way of saying we are screwed.
Yep. Yep.
I'll say it straightforward. But in a diplomatic language, they have to soften the blow.
Yeah.
Why is this? Why is this?
Would you like to watch a video of
Sure. Let's do the video
right.
first, then I'll do a little short analysis on it. So
it's one of the coolest things to actually watch, this kind of thing happen via social media, because we didn't used to have that, right? So in history, we didn't get to watch these things unfold. But here it is. Do you see it, David?
Oh, hold
Niger.
I need to remove. Oh, you removed that one. Good.
Oh, yeah. Colonel Ibro, accompanied by other military men, led the anti-France protests earlier today in Niger. And that was on the 2nd. So look at all those people. Look at that.
Wow.
Okay, there's one more actually that I would like to show, and this one is let me share this tab instead. So this one is interesting because this is the police losing control at the French military base. Look at that.
Wow.
Oh, let me make it bigger for you guys. See if I can do that. That's really something.
Yeah. So basically, the way you guys gonna have to look at this is not only Niger is saying to France, "You done here." Basically, officially, you done here. And usually, when you ask a country to withdraw its forces, it's the same thing. It's funny how history goes in. This goes in parallel with what we experienced in Iraq, when Iraq government asked our government to leave. We kind of refused first. So, but in the case of Niger, it's because Africa, as I said last time, is reflecting that change on the global geopolitical landscape.
Yeah.
And this is where you're going to see that campaign. So basically, Niger is saying to France, "You done here. You done exploiting our country. You done exploiting the resources." And speaking of the resources, there is now a hidden fight between France and Niger regarding the price of uranium.
Yep.
Niger increased the price to 200 euros a kilo. Rightly, it's their own. France was getting it for 80 cents. Big difference.
Well, and so this whole thing, it's actually very interesting that you're bringing this up, because this really is. So Niger is the world's 7th largest uranium producer, which is big, and one of the highest grade ores in all of Africa. And its only major mine currently in production is operated by a French government-owned entity. So, and France has 56 nuclear reactors, and Niger accounts for 22% of France's supply of uranium last year alone.
Yeah.
So we're really looking at an economic fight. So some of the interesting things that have been said about this is that let's see if I can find this quote. Basically, what it talks about is that the French people are tired of having their resources being taken over.
You mean Niger people?
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know what I just said.
You said French.
Oh, I did not mean that. Sorry, guys. Strike that.
Niger.
I meant the Nigerian people are very tired of having their resources taken away from them. And they're saying it playing out. And it's hard to say, oh no, well, France should keep getting the same deal that it's been getting. I don't think anyone across the world would say that that's okay.
Well, actually, because the whole thing, it's Niger became now the hallmark of what needs to be done in Africa.
Yeah.
We're talking about across the continent. Because other countries are also realizing why they are not benefiting from their resources.
Absolutely.
Except that Niger came forceful to the forefront by challenging now France, pushing it out and say, we're done. And as a matter of fact, because here is why I said Niger is representing that really with that pivot of the global balance of power, is because you're going to have to think in terms of China's presence in Africa, Russia's presence in Africa, mainly in China. But China, why? Because of economics aspect. As a matter of fact, China volunteered, listen carefully, guys, China volunteered now to mediate between France and Niger.
Interesting.
We all know what happened between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, I follow up on this because not only I wrote a books about both countries, but that's part of my academic focus in the Middle East. Yesterday, the Iranian ambassador to Saudi Arabia arrived to Saudi Arabia yesterday.
Wow.
Officially.
Wow.
Whoever thought. This sign.
Whoever thought.
Yes,
wow.
That's because we were the one ensuring that that division and those tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran, given that Sunni versus Shiites, we used, China was able to broker a deal for that. Now China is saying, I'll be happy to mediate. To China, that's a big deal. What do I mean by this? That's how you grow your global influence. You don't grow your global influence through military. You can do it in a subtle way, diplomatically. Of course, like the video I released this morning about on the other channel, you guys might want to check it out, about China's strategy in Africa. Is the big picture. Of course, two main things: securing access to natural resources,
hugely,
and influencing the global landscape. This Niger case exemplified in the terms of international relations. This is the perfect scenario. France is realizing it's over, because here is just check this picture. I'm gonna, guys, share this with you. Tell me what's wrong with this picture, if anybody can pay attention. Tell me what is wrong with that picture.
Is it the flags in the back?
Okay, what's wrong with them?
Well, they're French and EU flags.
Why the EU?
That's a great question.
That's my point.
That's a great question.
So it shows you right there. This is about the idea of we, the EU. When I say EU, I'm not referring to all countries. You look at, for example, Hungary. Hungary doesn't get involved in this. As a matter of fact, Hungary pushed back against the EU to send more money to Ukraine. It's the idea of how countries like France and Germany, mainly France in this case, by showing, remember when we talked about the EU sending a humanitarian military mission?
Right. It was civilian military. Yeah.
So this is the reflection of it. And this is why Niger is saying, we've had it. You are out, your military out. But also we have to understand, because there were agreements between France and Niger. As a matter of fact, I did dig in some places and I found out when they signed those agreements between the two countries. Let me just open this here to check it out, because I read them in foreign language, so I can't post the foreign language. People not gonna.
I think that's one of the things people maybe don't know about us. How many languages do you speak?
A few.
I've got 3 under my belt. And you've got maybe 4.
Well, with the 6 at home,
6
at home with the whole family and all that stuff. But I don't do all 6. I do. So here's the thing. You look at that. The reason why is this important? To put it within the context of the agreements that Niger signed with France since 1977 are coming to an end. So let me just share with you quickly here. One of them has to do with an agreement that was signed on February 19th, 1977. It will be expired within 60 days. Another one was signed on May 25th, 2013, will be expired in 2 months. Another one was signed in July 2013, will expire in 5 months. and another one was signed in 2015.
Yeah.
It will expire. Actually, it should expire this month on September 3rd.
Wow. So that was yesterday.
Yeah. Then another one was signed on April 2020, will expire in 2 months. So my whole point for highlighting this is to show you how much France was sinking its claws into Niger because of resources.
Because of resources. You're absolutely right.
So now the picture is changing completely.
Yeah.
I believe, as an analyst, I believe for Niger, it's going to be the turning point into the global balance of power.
I think you're absolutely right.
That's the way I see it playing out.
You know, it's interesting because Niger is not the first to kick France out. Mali and Burkina Faso also kicked France out.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah. And in the case of Niger, they're not only doing this, you know what else they're doing?
Right.
They're preparing for military action.
Right.
But here is why. And we did talk about ECOWAS, right?
Yeah, we did. We did.
And I said it's nothing but hypes. You know why? Because yesterday, ECOWAS asked for help. And guess from whom? The EU.
Yep.
It tells you right there. And I remember using the term, it's on record, on whose behalf ECOWAS.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is where you guys need to always understand information in the books and articles, and it's not enough. Like when they asked Einstein about, when somebody asked him about, well, how about the time travel and all that stuff? He said, I don't know this kind of information. It's in the book.
Yeah.
What you need to understand is how to think.
Exactly.
How to think.
My gosh, that's so important.
And this is what's important about understanding these dynamics, because those is what pushed the trajectory of global order to go one way or another.
Yeah.
And we already seeing the shift.
Yeah.
Shift is already happening. And it's going to be multipolar. There are those who argue it's going to be bipolar. Well, because back then it used to be the Soviet Union and the United States.
Right.
There are those who are saying, no, it's going to be bipolar between China and the US.
Yeah.
No, it won't. It will be multipolar. And I remember about 3 or 4 months ago, I said one time that, mark my word on it, that the new multipolar system, it will be guided through economic blocks, not ideology.
Yeah.
This is what I'm seeing happening. And this is why China is volunteering to mediate.
Right.
Because that would be a big blow to the West.
Absolutely.
Big blow.
And interestingly enough, you know, we're looking at who they're kicking out, but who they're asking in. So Niger brought Wagner in, brought Russia in, and brought China in and allowed them to stay while kicking out France.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that the US hasn't really weighed in on this very much. So more or less, you know, some rumblings here, there are just, it's not a good idea. We denounce it and whatever, but there's not really a whole lot going on there. Like pretty much France is out on its own. The EU's not really stepping in. Nobody's really stepping in on this situation.
Yeah.
It's really just France that's getting kicked out here. But it is interesting that Niger brought Wagner in and brought China in and is kicking the West out.
Yeah.
And here's the deal. I have sympathy for them, because to have their resources being taken and have their population
for Niger.
For Niger, for the people whose resources
what you meant.
have
I
been,
just want to make sure our viewers,
you know, because there's always somebody who has to get in the comments and say, well, that's not right, that's not. No, what I mean is I have sympathy for the people of Niger, because how can you see the way that those people were living and see how rich in natural resources they were? And, you know, there's all these humanitarian things and let's see, can we use the word extremist, anti-extremism, all of these things. Well, how come it hasn't worked? For the decades that they've been trying to help the people, why hasn't that worked?
Well, you look at it just for what, I mean, let's just state the facts the way they are. If you are to take, for example, the presence of the European countries like France, the Germans were there before, the Dutch, the Belgians, whatever. You take all that, you take the presence of China in comparison to that, and you see the accomplishment I mean, you go just back 50 years and look at the history. What has been achieved in the last 20 years with the presence of China in Africa versus the last 50 years with the presence of the European or the colonial powers, or whatever term you want to use. And this is where that difference is. Africa, this is why I say it's a turning point.
Yeah.
And Africans, like you said, especially in Niger, reached that point where enough is enough.
And I don't blame them.
Yeah, no.
I don't blame them. And I think that it's, I think that the resources of any population belongs to that population. But, it's interesting because we have that same problem here. Do you know who owns the majority of the water in the United States? No. Nestle.
Wow.
Nestle, a corporation, owns the majority of the water here in the United States. For those of you guys who don't know that, that's part of what the government course is here to talk about. If you guys see it on your screen, we have launched a government course that David is teaching live, and it's because of things like that.
Yeah, the knowledge.
Because it's not just the people of Niger whose resources are being stolen out from under them.
No.
Here in the United States, our resources are being stolen out from under us too.
No. So the one thing I need to go back to, you mentioned about the US and when it comes down to this conflict here.
Yeah.
The reason why the push was against France more so than the US, because it begs the question, because there is more than what meet the eye.
Of course there is.
Just make no mistake about it.
Yeah.
And that begs the question. Could be that we have to orchestrate something in Gabon, what just happened? And if so, why?
Right.
Well, there's a quick answer to that. The reason being because Ali Bongo was Obama's point man in Africa vis-a-vis the Libyan conflict. You all know what happened in Libya.
Well, actually, say a little bit about that for the people who don't know.
Well, it's because, first of all, the Libyan leader back then was calling for a unified currency to bypass the petrodollar.
Yeah.
Use gold.
So he had to be ousted.
Well, the way that Obama did that, and by the way, this was through research, an article from the Global Research, which I'll be happy to share the link with you guys. And I read that particular magazine. It's very informative, very insightful. So it was an article written by Peter Koenig, very, very insightful. And the idea was that, hey, don't jump quick to conclusions. This is why you're not hearing much pushback against the US, because we had two main bases in Niger.
Absolutely.
Still have the drone base.
Yeah, still have the drone base.
But the idea of, we also think about it in terms of, why don't we throw the French under the bus?
Yeah.
Same way we did in Australia.
Absolutely.
Same thing.
And it's very interesting because we really aren't hearing anything about it.
No, you won't.
The reason that the French ambassador Sylvain Ite is getting thrown out is because he refused to meet with the new government, right? They're not throwing him out for no reason. They're throwing him out because France's position has been a really hard position on, we are trying to maintain control in the situation. You are not hearing the same out of the United States. And I wonder why that is.
Well, that is why there was that question, which is legitimate in my opinion, as to really all of a sudden the Gabon coup happened. Could be a distraction, could be this, could be that. This is why it's nice to understand more than just read something. And to me, that's where I see the big picture. The whole reason for all this, it has to do with the growing influence of China in Africa. And that comes with access to resources. Those resources that tends to influence the trajectory of what lies ahead. We're talking about lithium. If you think about lithium, what do you use lithium for?
Phone batteries, car batteries.
A
lot of our world is powered by lithium.
You think about uranium, you think about gold, you think about cobalt. And Africa happens to be rich in all this.
Oil and gas too.
Well, as a matter of fact, even for Gabon, plays a role into the OPEC.
So absolutely.
OPEC and went back. So my point in all this, don't just jump to conclusion. Just try to think what's behind.
Yeah.
This is why you are not hearing much about the US.
Mhm.
US has never been criticized in this.
Which is very interesting.
And even the US didn't use the term coup in
Right.
Niger at some point.
Right.
That tells you right there. We wanted to push the French and the bus.
Under the bus.
Because remember, France was the one that called for Europe to reduce its reliance on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And all this has to be put under the geopolitical lenses by looking exactly at the summit that just concluded in Johannesburg in South Africa regarding the BRICS and how it used to be that term of well, nothing's going to challenge G7, nothing's going to challenge the dollar, nothing anymore. Not anymore. And this is what you see in the reflection of it. That's how geopolitics works.
Absolutely.
To break it down in a simple approach, what you are witnessing or hearing about or reading about regarding Niger, it's a reflection of that change of the geopolitical landscape.
Yeah,
that is not to our favor.
No, it's not. And it's interesting here because, you know, Victoria Nuland went to Niger, and she was basically kicked out. She's basically kicked out and shut down.
Yeah.
But we haven't really heard much else since then. We also, because, you know, we do have a drone base here. The United States has a drone base in Niger. And it's interesting that we're not hearing anything. As the last that I heard, those personnel are completely safe. Why is that? Why is it that they're marching on the French military base and not the American military base?
Exactly.
So there are clearly some things going on behind the scenes that I think are very interesting. And I wonder if Washington basically knows that they're not going to win this. And so they're more or less kind of playing.
Let's sacrifice the French.
Right. Let's sacrifice the French and let's keep this kind of status quo going so that we don't lose everything.
Yeah.
Because let's say they do increase the price of uranium. Let's say they do increase the price of natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that China takes over the majority of the natural resources in Africa. And pays, you know, probably a much fairer wage.
Well, I'll push back. I'll push back against the word take over.
Okay.
I'll push back against that word. How will they take over? For that?
Well,
they're not going to take over because they're going to enter into.
Right.
This is very different. They're going to enter into an agreement.
Absolutely.
With so I won't categorize it as taking over. I will categorize it as entering into an agreement that is beneficial to both parties.
Yeah.
Which something France wasn't doing.
I agree.
That's where I see the difference.
I agree.
So
and I do agree. And I do see very much that China is doing a much fairer situation because basically what France was doing was
benefiting France
was honestly almost unconscionable or completely unconscionable.
That's true.
If you take the resources out of a country and you do not pay it fairly or even close to fairly, I think that's immoral. I actually think that makes you a bad guy. If you take the resources of a country and you do not give anything appropriate back, I think that makes you a bad guy. That's my personal opinion.
Colonialism, you know, the mindset. And it doesn't matter what country.
It does not matter what
that's
country.
True. Absolutely. I agree with you.
I think most of the water in the United States not belonging to us, the people, I actually think that makes them the bad guy too. So
that is true. I see your point.
What I'm saying though is that as you take over, one thing China has done very well is has gone out economically into the world and created situations that are far better than the ones that these countries had before. So I absolutely see that. But I've said this before, and you know, sometimes I get pushback, sometimes I don't. That is that there are two ways to take over the world. One is through war, right? Through war, through aggression, through power, through, you know, through the mechanisms, unfortunately, that the United States has primarily used. The other is economic. If you control and companies control a large part of the world. You know, as much as we would like to say, oh, the governments are in charge. Oh, the governments are in charge. They are not, because even central banks, for the most part, are businesses. Those are companies that are choosing whether to fund this or that, or call in that debt or what interest rate. You know, the Fed is not a government organization. We don't talk about that much here, but it's not. So we cannot take away the influence of corporations from the world that we live in. And so if China is now the country that is primarily in charge of those resources, I don't know what they're going to do with that. And no, I don't think anybody knows what they're going to do with that. But that is a way to gain influence over countries.
Yeah.
Because that's in some ways what the IMF does. They go and they say, here, we're here to bring you a whole lot of money. And the people in charge they're like, well, we like money. We like this.
Yeah.
So they're going to go for it. So what I don't know is what's going to happen as a result of that.
Well, I intend to ask this question for Dr. Hammond. I'm going to have an interview with him on Friday on the other channel. So Dr. Hammond and I will talk offline and all that. So and I'm intend to ask him this particular question to tie it to the history of China.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the whole history, you have to go back and see really, because history does reflect on exactly how a country behaves.
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. However, the thing with China is that it is sort of the rising power that is replacing the US in terms of global economy. So it is a rising economy as the United States economy is falling. And so its behavior as a global player, as just a regular global player, might very well be different from its behavior as a hegemon.
I would say I wouldn't use the term different. I will use the term irrational. So
irrational
policies.
Okay, tell me more.
Because that's what the US is embarking on.
Oh, absolutely.
And the way you look at it in two locations, basically, Africa and South China Sea.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I'm sure you heard what just happened with New Zealand.
Well, and Taiwan.
Well, Taiwan has always been the case, but New Zealand.
What just happened with
New Zealand's going to be now the jaws of AUKUS will be open to swallow New Zealand. And if you know anything about New Zealand, then New Zealand has always took a stand on nuclear-free zones.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I would like to go on my honeymoon to New Zealand. So New Zealand, stay cool.
Yeah. Well, they have
stay cool, New Zealand.
Have elections coming up in October. So I'm an outsider. I'm not. I can't dictate. You know, I would never dictate. You know, but if I had if I am asked, it would be nice to see Mahuta, the current foreign minister, become the prime minister.
What do you think he would do?
Well, Mahuta. She's a female.
Oh, sorry.
She's indigenous. One of the indigenous.
Oh, that's wonderful. Mahuta. That's wonderful. Yeah.
And she's the one who looked at Tony Blinken in his eyes and said, don't ever think about it as far as AUKUS. But her boss, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, a white dude, following the Anglo, he kind of is her boss.
Yeah,
you know, there's the hierarchy. You know? This is why I think New Zealanders they're gonna now have to make a really crucial decision as to they don't want that party anymore. Take him out. And I wish Mahuta will run for the PM. She will get it. Otherwise, I can see her resigning and leaving. She's an indigenous being. Those people have a lot of ties to the land. They don't, and they stood their ground regarding the nuclear. All of a sudden, and that in itself is a reflection of our policy being pushed in the South China Sea, in Australia, in New Zealand. We all see what's going on with Australia. You're seeing the same, and now it's going to be reflected also in Africa.
Yeah. So. Well, and it's actually very interesting. You know, we have been taught that the power lies with the government, the power lies with the corporations, but the power really lies with the people. And I remember reading a Deepak Chopra quote when the election was happening between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton here in the United States. And he said, whoever wins is the president we deserve. And, you know, a lot of people pushed back on him for that, but it's the truth, because if we are the ones who stand up for what we actually want, that's what happens. And it's interesting to watch, you know, some of these coups are being taken out or executed, coups, revolutions, whatever you'd like to call them. They're being done by people who have been playing the long game.
That's true.
These seem to be people who have been cooking this for a long time, who have seen the problems of their people for a long time.
All right, let me close this out so we can move on to the next topic. So the bottom line, guys, what you need to understand in all this is that by kicking French soldiers out of their base, which is the base is in Namambi, if I'm not mistaken, is near the capital Niamey.
Yeah,
they had about 1,500 soldiers there. Basically, by asking them out is the official sort of withdrawal of France. France will have no say anymore. And with the expiration of the agreements they done, so you'll see the era of France colonialism or French colonialism in Niger is coming to an end.